What would you do if the man who shattered your heart, the man who called you an anchor, holding him back, decided to get married on the one day of the year that was sacred to you both? For Aurora Monroe, that day was October 12th, her wedding anniversary. The invitation wasn't just an insult, it was a declaration of war on her memory. But Declan Peterson made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed his ex-wife was still the broken woman he'd left behind. He had no idea she was about to RSVP in a way that would not only crash his wedding, but shatter his entire carefully constructed new world. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a catalogue for Italian leather goods and a bill from the architectural firm. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind that whispers of expense and occasion. Aurora Monroe ran a manicured finger over the embossed lettering, her heart giving a painful, familiar lurch. Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Miller request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Sophie Miller to Mr. Declan Peterson. And there at the bottom, the date that felt like a deliberate poisoned dart, Saturday the 12th of October. Their anniversary. 5 years they had been married. 10 years they had been together. October 12th wasn't just a date. It was a cornerstone of her life, a day she had once believed was etched into the stars. Even after the divorce, a messy, brutal affair that had flayed her soul raw, the date remained sacrosanct. She'd spend it quietly, sometimes with her sister, sometimes alone, a day of somber reflection on the woman she used to be. Now Declan was taking that too. He wasn't just moving on. He was bulldozing the ruins of their shared history to build his new life on top of them. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, sounding foreign in the minimalist quiet of her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Of course he was. It was so quintessentially Declan, grandiose, selfish, and utterly thoughtless. The divorce had been 2 years ago. The words he'd used still echoed in her mind during her weaker moments. You're not ambitious enough, Aurora. You're comfortable. You're an anchor, and I'm a ship meant for the open sea. He had made her feel small, as if her dreams of building her interior design firm brick by painstaking brick were quaint hobbies compared to his vague, bombastic ambitions in the world of finance. He'd painted her as the reason his career hadn't skyrocketed, the quiet domestic weight holding back his ascent. The irony was so thick she could choke on it. In the 2 years since he'd cut the anchor, her firm, Monroe Interiors, had exploded. She'd landed a feature in Architectural Digest, secured contracts with 2 boutique hotel chains, and was now in negotiations to design a series of luxury lofts in Dubai. She wasn't just successful. She was thriving in a way she never could have when a part of her energy was constantly being diverted to soothe his fragile ego. She dropped the invitation on the marble island, the sharp clack echoing in the room. Her phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Maxwell. He was standing on a tarmac in Geneva, a breathtaking backdrop of the Swiss Alps behind him, grinning into the camera. The text read, "Closed the deal. The prototype is officially ours. Celebrating with fondue. Wish you were here. Home tomorrow. J." A genuine smile touched Aurora's lips, the first one since opening the mail. Maxwell Lancaster, the man who had walked into her life 6 months ago like a calm, steady sunrise after a long, violent storm. He was a tech billionaire, a fact he rarely mentioned. And that was the least interesting thing about him. He was kind, fiercely intelligent, and looked at her not as an anchor, but as the sea itself, vast, powerful, and beautiful. He celebrated her successes with more enthusiasm than she did listening for hours as she detailed fabric swatches and lighting schematics. With him, she felt seen, not just observed. She picked up the invitation again, the anger returning, but this time it was different. It wasn't the hollow ache of a victim. It was a cold, clarifying fire. Declan didn't know who she was anymore. He still saw her as the woman who cried for a week after he left, the woman who had to sell their shared brownstone because she couldn't bear the memories. He was flaunting his new life, his new bride, Sophie Miller, a socialite whose father owned half of Wall Street. Aurora noted with a cynical pang on their day, assuming she would shrink wounded into the shadows. He was assuming she was still anchored in their past. That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the length of her apartment, the glittering panorama of New York City, a silent witness to her turmoil. The city had been their playground. They'd had their first date at a small jazz club in the village. He'd proposed on the Bow Bridge in Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon, just like this one. His ghost was everywhere. For 2 years, she had worked to exorcise him. She'd poured her pain, her anger, her resilience into her work, and it had paid off. She had built a fortress around her heart with steel and glass and success. But this invitation was a battering ram threatening to breach the walls. Going was out of the question. It was masochistic. It was handing Declan the victory, showing up alone, a spectre at his feast. It would confirm every condescending, pitying glance from his family and friends who had always thought he was too good for her. Not going felt like defeat. It felt like hiding. It felt like letting him have the final say on what October 12th meant. It would be his wedding day forever. The thought was unbearable. She found herself in her home office, scrolling through the social media profile of Sophie Miller. It was a curated gallery of perfection. Skiing in Aspen, yachting in Monaco, charity galas at the Met. Sophie was blonde, beautiful, and radiated the effortless confidence of someone who had never wanted for anything. In one photo, Declan stood beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. He wore a tailored suit, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. He looked like he'd won. Aurora's finger hovered over a picture of the engaged couple, a professionally shot photo with Sophie's enormous diamond ring prominently displayed. The caption penned by Sophie read, "I can't wait to marry my king and build our empire together. Declan Peterson, you are my everything." His empire, Aurora thought, with a humorless smile. Declan had always talked about his empire, a vague and glorious future that was always just around the corner, always impeded by some external factor, the market, his boss, his supposedly unsupportive wife. The fire within her burned hotter. It wasn't about the man anymore. She felt nothing for Declan but a dull, clinical revulsion. It was about the narrative. He had written the story of their ending, casting her as the villain, the dead weight. He was now writing a new story, a triumphant sequel on the very day that defined their shared history. She would not allow it. She would not be a footnote in the story of Declan Peterson. When Maxwell's car pulled up to her building the next evening, she was waiting. He stepped out, a tall, commanding presence, in a simple gray sweater and jeans that probably cost more than her first car. He enveloped her in a hug, his scent a comforting mix of expensive cologne and the clean, crisp air of the Alps still clinging to his coat. "You seem tense," he said, his perceptive blue eyes searching hers. "Everything okay?" Inside, she handed him the invitation. He read it, his expression hardening almost imperceptibly. He looked from the cardstock to the date, then back to her face. He saw the storm in her eyes. "The 12th," he said, his voice low, "of all the days in the year." "It's a power move," Aurora said, her voice tight. "It's a final twist of the knife to make sure I know he won." "And what do you want to do about it?" Maxwell asked. He didn't offer platitudes. He didn't tell her to ignore it or that Declan wasn't worth her energy. He knew she was past that. This was something different. "I was going to throw it away. I was going to book a spa day, fly to Paris, anything to pretend it isn't happening," she admitted. "But it feels like letting him win. It feels like I'm still letting him dictate my life, even in his absence." She looked at Maxwell, at his calm, unwavering face. "He thinks I'm still the person he left. He thinks I'm alone, struggling, a comfortable little designer. He has no idea who I am now." A slow smile spread across Maxwell's face. It was the smile he got when he was about to solve a complex coding problem or outmaneuver a corporate rival. So he said, his eyes glinting with a shared spark of rebellion, "Why don't we show him?" The idea, once spoken aloud, took on a life of its own. It shifted from a wild, vengeful fantasy into a tangible, strategic plan. Maxwell's question, "Why don't we show him?" wasn't just rhetorical. It was an offer, a key to a door Aurora hadn't even realized was there. "What do you mean, show him?" she asked, a tremor of excitement running through her. "Crash his wedding, Maxwell. That's insane. It's dramatic and petty." "Is it?" he countered, leaning against the kitchen island, the picture of calm audacity. "Or is it simply correcting a narrative? He's telling a story about you to his new family, to his friends, to himself. A story where you were the weak link. You have the opportunity to present a revised edition." He picked up the invitation again. "Blackwood Manor. Quaint, old money aesthetic. An hour north of the city. We could drive." He paused, a theatrical glint in his eye. "Or we could make an entrance that's a little less terrestrial." Aurora's heart started beating faster. She knew what he was suggesting. Maxwell owned a fleet of private aircraft through a subsidiary of his company, Lancaster Aerospace. To him, a jet was like a car. "You want to fly to his wedding?" she breathed. "The manor has a heliport, but it's small, barely fit for a Bell 429, Maxwell mused, already scrolling on his phone. "However, there's a private airfield less than 10 miles away. Ample runway for the G700. We could be there, wheels down, in under 20 minutes from Teterboro." The Gulfstream G700, Maxwell's newest acquisition, a flying masterpiece of engineering and luxury that he often called his sky office. The thought was so audacious, so utterly beyond the realm of anything Declan could possibly conceive of, that Aurora laughed, a real deep laugh that broke the tension in her chest. He would have a complete and total meltdown, she said, the image flashing in her mind. "That's a potential side effect," Maxwell said, with a straight face. "But that's not the point. The point, Aurora, is for you to walk into that place, not as Declan Peterson's sad ex-wife, but as Aurora Monroe, the woman you are today. Successful, happy, and with a man who sees you as a supernova, not an anchor. It's not about revenge. It's about closure, on your terms." His words sliced through her remaining hesitation. He was right. This wasn't about being petty. It was about reclaiming her own story. It was about showing up for herself, proving to the one person who mattered her that the ghosts of the past had no power. "Okay," she said, the word feeling momentous. "Let's do it." The next 10 days were a whirlwind of focused preparation. It felt less like planning a party crash and more like a military operation, with Maxwell as the general and Aurora as the commander on the ground. First, the dress. Aurora knew it couldn't be just any dress. It had to be a statement. She didn't want a revenge dress in the classic sense, not something overtly sexy or attention-seeking. She needed something that spoke of power, elegance, and untouchable grace. She called in a favor with a designer friend in Milan, a woman whose couture gowns were usually reserved for red carpets and royalty. She explained the situation vaguely at first. "I have an event. I need to make an impression." What kind of impression, the designer Isabella had asked over a video call? "Like I own the world, but I'm too busy to be bothered with the paperwork," Aurora replied. Isabella had cackled with delight. "Say no more, my darling. I have the perfect creation." 3 days later, a custom-fitted gown arrived by courier. It was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light. It was cut with architectural precision, a high neckline, long sleeves, and a column silhouette that draped over her body like liquid moonlight. The only embellishment was a cascade of tiny diamond-like crystals scattered across one shoulder, as if she had brushed against a nebula. It was breathtaking. It was perfect. Next, Maxwell handled the logistics. He arranged for the jet, the pilots, and a gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom to be waiting at the private airfield near Blackwood Manor. "Subtlety in motion," he called it. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Aurora asked him one evening as they sat on her balcony sharing a bottle of wine. A sliver of doubt had crept in. "It's your time, your resources. It's my baggage." Maxwell took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Let me tell you something about my world, Aurora. It's filled with people who want something from me. My money, my connections, my name. It's a constant transaction. With you, it's different. You want my time. You want my heart. You let me into your world, your baggage included. Helping you close this chapter isn't a chore. It's a privilege. Besides," he added with a wink, "I've always wanted to see a narcissist's face when his carefully constructed reality implodes. I'll bring popcorn." His unwavering support was her armor. With him by her side, she felt invincible. The day before the wedding, a package arrived for her. It was a small, velvet box from Maxwell. Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, was a necklace. It was a single, impossibly large, pear-cut sapphire suspended from a delicate platinum chain. It was the exact shade of her dress. Her breath caught. It was a museum-quality piece. "Maxwell, this is too much." He called her the moment he knew she'd received it. "It's not too much," he said, his voice warm. "It's a reminder. That man gave you costume jewelry and empty promises. I just wanted you to wear a piece of the sky." On the morning of October 12th, Aurora woke up, not with the familiar dread, but with a strange electric calm. There was no sadness, no painful nostalgia. It was just a date. A day for a new memory to be forged. She spent the morning at her office, signing off on the Dubai project drafts. Her focus was sharp, her mind clear. She was Aurora Monroe, CEO of a thriving company. Declan Peterson was a footnote from a previous chapter. By late afternoon, the transformation began. A hair and makeup artist recommended by Isabella worked silently and efficiently. Her hair was swept up into a sleek, intricate chignon. Her makeup was understated but striking, emphasizing her eyes, making them look like polished obsidian. When she finally slipped into the midnight blue gown, she hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. This was not the girl who had married Declan Peterson. This was not the woman who had crumbled when he left. This was someone else entirely. Someone forged in fire. Maxwell arrived looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over her. Aurora, he breathed, his voice filled with genuine awe. You are transcendent. He held out his hand, and as she took it, he fastened the sapphire necklace around her neck. The cool weight of it against her skin was a final click of a lock, sealing her resolve. Ready to go? He asked. She took a deep breath, meeting his gaze in the mirror. Ready. The flight to Teterboro was silent and swift. As they boarded the Gulf Stream, the sheer scale of the moment hit her. The cabin was larger than her first apartment, all cream leather and polished mahogany. The flight attendant offered them champagne. As the jet engines spooled up with a powerful rising whine, Aurora looked out the window at the setting sun, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She thought of Declan down on the ground, probably adjusting his tie, basking in the adoration of his guests, completely oblivious. He thought he was the ship meant for the open sea. He had no idea a hurricane was coming. Blackwood Manor was exactly as Aurora had pictured it, a sprawling Tudor-style estate that tried very hard to project an air of old-world aristocracy. Manicured lawns, ivy-covered stone walls, and a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. As the Rolls-Royce Phantom glided silently up the drive, Aurora could see the main house ablaze with light, the cheerful sounds of a string quartet drifting through the crisp autumn air. Guests in their finest attire mingled on the flagstone patio, champagne flutes in hand. It was a scene of carefully curated elegance, tasteful, expensive, and utterly predictable. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 5:30 p.m. Just as the sun began to set, Maxwell had timed their arrival for 6:15 p.m., perfectly positioned to intercept the post-ceremony, pre-reception cocktail hour. It was the moment of maximum social visibility. Their approach, however, had begun 10 minutes earlier. The first sign that something was amiss in the world of Blackwood Manor was a sound. It started as a low, distant hum, a vibration felt more than heard. It wasn't the familiar thwump-thwump of a helicopter, but a deeper, more powerful roar that seemed to come from the sky itself. The string quartet faltered mid-Mozart. Guests paused their conversations, tilting their heads, their brows furrowed in confusion. The sound grew, swelling from a hum to a full-throated roar that rattled the antique window panes and vibrated through the soles of their expensive shoes. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated power. Heads turned, eyes scanning the darkening sky. And then they saw it. Banking gracefully over the Hudson River Valley, its landing lights cutting through the twilight, was the sleek, unmistakable shape of a Gulfstream G700. It was impossibly large, impossibly close. It flew with a majestic, predatory grace, its silver fuselage catching the last rays of the setting sun. It was so out of context for this quiet, bucolic setting that it felt like a scene from a movie. The jet didn't land at the manor, of course. It continued its elegant descent towards the private airfield a few miles away, its thunderous passage a herald of something to come. The whispers started immediately. What on earth was that? Did you see the size of it? Whose jet is that? Does someone here know the president? Inside the main hall, Declan Peterson was at the peak of his glory. He had just exchanged vows with Sophie Miller. He was now officially connected to one of New York's wealthiest families. His financial troubles were a thing of the past. He stood with his new wife, his hand possessively on the small of her back, accepting congratulations. His mother, Margaret Peterson, a woman with a perpetually pinched face and disapproving eyes, hovered nearby, beaming with pride for the first time in years. Such a wonderful ceremony, Declan, a guest, gushed, and Sophie, You look radiant." Declan's smile was wide and practiced. "Thank you. We're just so thrilled to start our life together. It's a new beginning, a real ascent." He loved that word, ascent. It was then that the low growl of a high-performance engine replaced the fading roar of the jet. The Rolls-Royce Phantom, black as a starless night, pulled to a stop at the manor's grand entrance. It was a vehicle that commanded attention not through noise, but through its sheer imposing presence. A valet, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and panic, scrambled to open the passenger door. The first thing the guests on the patio saw was a leg, long, elegant, clad in a sheer stocking, and ending in a stiletto that looked like it was carved from obsidian. Then Aurora Monroe emerged. A collective, hushed intake of breath seemed to suck the air from the patio. She rose from the car, not like a person, but like an event. The midnight blue gown flowed around her, the crystals on her shoulder glittering like a captured constellation. The sapphire at her throat was a point of deep, cold fire. Her hair was a sculpted masterpiece, her face serene and unreadable. She didn't look angry or vengeful. She looked like she was bored with gods. She paused for a moment, her eyes scanning the stunned crowd with a look of cool, mild appraisal. Then Maxwell stepped out from the other side. If Aurora was the queen of the night, he was her king. The Tom Ford tuxedo fit him like a second skin. He radiated an aura of quiet, unassailable confidence. He wasn't handsome in the flashy, desperate way Declan was. He was handsome in the way a mountain is handsome, solid, timeless, and powerful. He walked to Aurora's side and offered her his arm, his movements economical and precise. Together, they looked less like wedding guests and more like they had arrived to purchase the entire estate as a weekend getaway. The whispers on the patio turned into frantic, urgent murmurs. "Is that Aurora, Declan's ex-wife? My God, I didn't even recognize her. Who is that with her? He looks important. That dress, that necklace must have cost more than the wedding." Declan had just raised a glass of champagne to his lips when he saw the commotion at the door. He turned, a slight annoyance on his face, expecting a late-arriving cousin. His eyes fell on the couple framed in the grand entryway. The champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly, pale mask. His jaw went slack. It was a total system failure. His mind simply could not process the data it was receiving. Aurora, that was Aurora, the comfortable, mousy anchor of a woman he had so righteously discarded. And who the hell was the man with her who looked like he could buy and sell everyone in the room? Before his first drink was finished, Sophie, his new bride, followed his gaze. "Declan, darling, what is it?" Her eyes landed on Aurora. A flicker of confusion, then recognition, then a gathering storm of feminine indignation. What is she doing here? Aurora and Maxwell began to move, gliding through the parted sea of guests with an unhurried grace. They weren't crashing. They were gracing the event with their presence. Aurora's eyes finally found Declan's across the crowded room. She gave him a small, polite smile, a smile one might give to a vaguely familiar waiter. They reached the shell-shocked groom, the broken glass crunching under Maxwell's impeccable shoes. Ignoring the furious glare of the bride and the horrified gasp of her new mother-in-law, Aurora stopped directly in front of her ex-husband. She tilted her head, her expression one of pleasant curiosity. "Declan," she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence of the room. "What a lovely party! You should have told me you were having one." The silence that followed Aurora's words was thick and heavy, broken only by the frantic internal calculations happening behind Declan's eyes. He looked from Aurora's impossibly serene face to Maxwell's cool, observant gaze, and then back to the shattered champagne flute at his feet. It was a perfect metaphor for his state of mind. His first instinct was aggression, the cornered animal's response. "Aurora, what the hell are you doing here? You weren't invited." His voice was louder than he intended, a raw, panicked edge to it. Aurora raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Oh, I must have been mistaken." She feigned a look at the invitation she wasn't holding. "My apologies. We were in the neighborhood and saw the lights. We can certainly leave if we're intruding." It was a masterful stroke. She was offering him an out, a way to de-escalate, but it was an out that required him to publicly ask her to leave her who looked like a goddess, accompanied by a man who radiated influence. To do so would make him look petty and insecure. Maxwell, who hadn't said a word, simply watched Declan, his expression unreadable, but his presence immense. He was a silent checkmate on the board. Sophie, the bride, had no such compunctions. "I think you should," she hissed, stepping forward. Her white dress was a stark contrast to Aurora's dark silk. "This is my wedding day. You have no right to be here." Aurora finally turned her gaze to Sophie, and for the first time, a flicker of something not pity, but perhaps a detached empathy, entered her eyes. "Sophie, isn't it congratulations? He's all yours." The words were simple, but the delivery was devastating. She said it with the weary magnanimity of someone giving away a used piece of furniture. The insult was so subtle, so elegantly delivered, that Sophie was left momentarily speechless, unsure of how to even process it. Before Declan could muster a coherent response, his mother, Margaret Peterson, swooped in. Margaret had spent years perfecting her particular brand of condescending disapproval, and she had always directed the full force of it at Aurora. "Aurora, I knew you had no class, but this is a new low." Margaret spat, her voice a venomous whisper. "To show up here trying to ruin your ex-husband's happiness, it's pathetic." This was the moment Aurora had dreaded, the confrontation with the woman who had made her feel inadequate for a decade. But the old fear was gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. "Hello, Margaret." Aurora said, her tone even and cool. "You look well." Anger is clearly a preservative. She glanced at Maxwell. "Darling, this is Margaret Peterson, Declan's mother. She was instrumental in the success of our marriage." Maxwell extended a hand. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Peterson." Maxwell Lancaster. The name landed in the charged atmosphere like a dropped anvil. Lancaster, as in Lancaster Aerospace, as in Lancaster Innovations, as in one of the 10 richest self-made men under 40 in the world. Even Margaret, in her bubble of suburban snobbery, knew that name. Her jaw, which had been set in a line of righteous fury, went slack. Her eyes widened, flicking from Maxwell's hand to his face, and then to Aurora, who was now linked with him. The equation did not compute. Margaret's hand, which had been clenched at her side, weakly rose and shook Maxwell's. Mr. Lancaster, I don't understand." "Aurora and I are together," Maxwell stated simply, leaving no room for doubt. He then turned his gaze back to Declan. "Peterson, we don't want to cause a scene. We were simply passing by. Perhaps my fiancé and I could have a celebratory drink with the happy couple and be on our way, fiancé." The word detonated in the center of the room. Aurora felt Maxwell squeeze her arm gently. They had discussed this. It was the final, unassailable piece of the narrative. She wasn't just dating a billionaire, she was marrying him. The sapphire around her neck wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. Declan stared his face, a kaleidoscope of shocked jealousy and pure, unadulterated rage. Fiancé, the woman he had cast off as dead weight, was engaged to Maxwell Lancaster. It was a cosmic injustice. It defied the laws of the universe as he understood them, a universe that was supposed to revolve around him. The guests who had been trying their best to pretend they weren't listening were now abuzz with the revelation. The story was rewriting itself in real time. This wasn't a pathetic ex trying to spoil a wedding. This was a phoenix, risen from ashes Declan didn't even know he'd created, arriving with a dragon in tow. Trapped Declan had no choice but to play the gracious host. Of course, he choked out, forcing a smile that was more of a grimace. Let's all have a drink. He led them towards a small private study off the main hall, away from the prying eyes of the guests. The four of them, a groom in turmoil, a furious bride, a serene ex-wife, and her billionaire fiancé, entered the room. The air was thick with unspoken history and imminent conflict. Declan poured himself a large scotch and downed half of it in one gulp. He finally found his voice, a low accusatory growl directed at Aurora. "This is a game to you, isn't it? Showing up like this with him." He gestured dismissively at Maxwell. "To rub my face in it." "Your face?" Aurora asked, genuinely curious. "Declan, why would you assume my life still revolves around you? I came here tonight to close a door. You chose to have your wedding on October 12th. You must have known I'd see the invitation. Did you expect me to sit at home and cry? Is that the role you assigned me? I expected you to have some decency," he shot back. "And was it decent to tell me I was an anchor?" she replied, her voice dropping, losing its public coolness, and taking on a sharper, more personal edge. "Was it decent to dismantle my self-worth so you could walk away guilt-free? I spent years believing you, Declan. Believing I was the reason you weren't soaring." It was the truth, he insisted, his desperation making him reckless. "Look at you now. You only manage this." He waved a hand at her dress, her necklace, "because you latched onto someone richer. It's the same thing. You're just a more expensive anchor now." It was a fatal mistake. The insult was so crude, so revealing of his own transactional worldview that it hung in the air, ugly and pathetic. Before Aurora could even respond, Maxwell stepped forward slightly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Mr. Peterson Maxwell," began his voice, a quiet, lethal calm. "You seem to be under a few misapprehensions. When I met Aurora, she was already the CEO of a multi-million-dollar design firm that she built from the ground up with her own talent and grit. She had already secured the Dubai contracts that I assure you are worth more than this entire estate. I am not the source of her success. I am merely the man lucky enough to be by her side. You, on the other hand..." Maxwell paused, letting the silence stretch. He gave Declan a slow, deliberate, head-to-toe look of appraisal, the kind one gives to a faulty piece of equipment. "I've seen your file," Maxwell continued, his voice dropping even lower. "When Aurora mentioned your name, my security team did a routine background check. It's standard procedure for anyone who enters our lives. The debt from your failed crypto ventures, the margin calls you barely met by borrowing against your parents' retirement fund. Your ascent in finance seems to have been more of a free fall." Declan's face went from pale to ashen. He looked like he'd been physically struck. "You have no right. Don't talk to me about rights." Maxwell cut him off, the steel in his voice, now unmistakable. You left a woman like Aurora, and you tried to break her spirit on the way out. Now you stand here in a suit, probably paid for by your father-in-law, in a venue paid for by your father-in-law, about to accept a job you didn't earn from your father-in-law, and you have the audacity to call her an anchor. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot. Sophie, who had been watching with righteous anger, now had a flicker of confusion and doubt in her eyes. She looked at Declan, then at Maxwell, then back at Declan, searching his face for a denial. She found none. She only saw the panicked, guilty sweat beading on his forehead. The first crack in the facade of her perfect king had appeared, and it was starting to spread. The silence in the study was no longer just tense. It was suffocating. Maxwell's words hung in the air, each one a damning indictment that stripped away Declan's carefully constructed persona. Declan stood exposed not as a titan of industry, but as a desperate man in a rented suit. Sophie was the first to break the silence. Her voice was small, uncertain, a stark contrast to her earlier fury. "Declan, what is he talking about? What debt?" Declan rounded on her, his panic curdling into desperate anger. "He's lying. Sophie, can't you see what this is? She's brought him here to ruin our day, to plant these lies." But his denial was weak, his eyes shifty. He couldn't meet her gaze. He couldn't meet anyone's. Aurora watched him, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. The anger she had held on to for so long was dissolving, replaced by a cold, clear pity. He wasn't the formidable man who had crushed her spirit. He was just a boy in a man's body, terrified of being found out. "It's not a lie, is it, Declan?" she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact. "I remember the late nights, the frantic phone calls you tried to hide. I remember you selling off the stocks my grandfather left me, telling me it was for a guaranteed investment. I just never put it all together. I believed you when you said it was my fault, that my lack of vision was stressing you out." She took a step closer, her voice remaining low and steady, a stark contrast to his unraveling composure. "The story you told me about me being an anchor, that was never the truth. The truth is your ship was already sinking, wasn't it? You weren't cutting an anchor. You were jumping onto the nearest lifeboat." She glanced at Sophie, whose hand had flown to her mouth, her eyes wide with dawning horror. The lifeboat had a name. "No," Declan snarled, cornered. He turned back to Aurora, his face contorted with a venomous resentment. "You want to talk about the truth? You were never satisfied. You were always pushing your little design business, your little projects. You should have been supporting me, my vision. If you had just been the wife I needed, none of this would have happened." It was his last, desperate gambit, blame the victim. But the words, once so powerful, were now hollow and pathetic. Maxwell let out a short, mirthless laugh. "The wife you needed? You mean the financier you didn't have? Mrs. Peterson," he said, turning his attention briefly to Margaret, who was frozen by the door, her face a mask of disbelief. "You must be proud." But the final devastating blow didn't come from Maxwell or Aurora. It came from Sophie. Her initial shock had hardened into a cold, terrifying clarity. The little inconsistencies she had overlooked, the vague answers Declan gave about his business, his eagerness to have her father handle all their finances, it all clicked into place. The man she had just married wasn't a king building an empire. He was a refugee seeking asylum from his own failures. "My father," Sophie said, her voice trembling but clear. "The vice president position at his firm. The one he offered you as a wedding gift. Was that part of the deal, Declan?" Declan's face crumpled. The fight went out of him, replaced by a desperate, pleading look. "Sophie, baby, listen to me. It wasn't like that. I love you. I fell in love with you and your father just... He saw my potential. He wanted to help. Help you?" Sophie's voice rose, laced with hysteria. "Help you by paying off your debts. Was that it was I, the bailout package? Was our marriage a business transaction?" "No, of course not," he pleaded, reaching for her. She recoiled as if his touch were toxic. "Don't lie to me. Not anymore." Tears streamed down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. That jet that flew over here, all those whispers from the guests, they were all looking at me, pitying me, the stupid rich girl who bought herself a husband. The raw, ugly truth of her words hung in the air. Declan had no response. His silence was a confession. This was the moment Aurora had unknowingly been waiting for. Not a moment of revenge, but of complete and utter vindication. It wasn't about her being better off. It was about the fundamental lie of their breakup being exposed. She hadn't failed him. He had failed himself, and he had used her as a scapegoat. With a quiet grace, she turned to leave. Her purpose there was finished. The door was not just closed, it was sealed, the lock turned, the key dissolved. As she reached the door, she paused beside the sobbing bride. For a moment, she saw not the snooty socialite, but another woman who had been deceived by Declan's charm. On impulse, she spoke, her voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a quiet finality. "For what it's worth," Aurora said, "I don't think you're stupid. I think you just believed him. I did too, for a very long time." Sophie looked up, her tear-filled eyes meeting Aurora's. In that moment, there was a flash of understanding between two women who had occupied the same space in a man's dishonest world. Then Aurora and Maxwell were gone, stepping out of the suffocating study and back into the main hall. The string quartet had resumed, playing a brave but futile attempt to restore normalcy. But the atmosphere was irrevocably changed. The guests fell silent again as Aurora and Maxwell passed their expressions, a mixture of awe, pity, and frantic excitement. They were witnesses to a legend in the making. They didn't look back as they exited the manor. They didn't need to hear the shouting that erupted from the study. They didn't need to see Sophie rip the veil from her hair, or see Declan's mother finally comprehending the monumental fraud her son had perpetrated. As the Rolls-Royce pulled away from Blackwood Manor, Aurora looked at its reflection in the side mirror. A house of lies, ablaze with light, beginning to crumble from the inside out. She felt no joy, no schadenfreude. She just felt light. The anchor wasn't him. It had been the story he'd made her believe, and now she was free of it. The ride back to the private airfield was silent, but it was a comfortable, shared silence. Aurora leaned her head against the plush leather of the Rolls-Royce, the lights of passing cars painting fleeting patterns across Maxwell's stoic profile. The adrenaline was beginning to subside, leaving in its wake a profound and bone-deep sense of peace. The G700 was waiting for them on the tarmac, a beacon of otherworldly power in the quiet darkness of the countryside. As they ascended the stairs and the cabin door sealed shut, with a soft hiss, it felt like they were leaving the entire messy terrestrial world behind. Once airborne, the lights of the Hudson Valley spread out below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. Aurora could just make out a cluster of lights that was Blackwood Manor, a tiny, insignificant speck in the vast darkness. "Are you okay?" Maxwell asked, his hand covering hers. "I am," she said, and she was surprised by the depth of her own sincerity. "I'm better than okay." For 2 years, I've been carrying this weight, this narrative that I was less than, that I wasn't enough. I thought seeing him again would hurt. I thought seeing him happy would break me. She looked out the window at the shrinking lights below. But he wasn't happy, he was terrified. And I wasn't broken. I was free. She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, but they were not tears of sadness. Thank you, Maxwell. Not for the jet, or the dress, or the necklace. Thank you for giving me the support to go back there and find myself again. He brought her hand to his lips. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have, Aurora. I just cleared the runway. They didn't talk about Declan for the rest of the flight. They talked about the future. They planned a trip to Kyoto to see the cherry blossoms in the spring. He told her about a new philanthropic foundation he was starting for STEM education for girls, and her eyes lit up as she immediately started sketching ideas for the foundation's headquarters on a cocktail napkin. They were two people building something real, looking forward, not back. The aftermath of their visit to Blackwood Manor became the stuff of legend in New York society circles. The story pieced together from the whispers of guests and the loud, furious arguments that followed their departure spread like wildfire. The wedding, for all intents and purposes, ended the moment Aurora and Maxwell left. Sophie Miller, in a spectacular display of wrath, had called her father from the study. The conversation was reportedly short and brutally effective. The vice president position was rescinded. The financial safety net was yanked away. The marriage, not even 3 hours old, was over. Sophie left with her parents that night, leaving a humiliated Declan to face his stunned guests and his aghast mother alone in the monument to his failed ambitions. The annulment was swift and merciless. A few weeks later, Aurora saw a small piece in a business gossip column. Declan Peterson had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His parents had sold their home to cover the debts he had accrued against it. He had fallen from a height that had only ever existed in his own imagination. Aurora felt nothing. It was like reading about a stranger. One crisp December evening, she and Maxwell were walking through Central Park. Snow had just begun to fall, dusting the trees and muffling the sounds of the city. They stopped on the Bow Bridge, the same spot where Declan had proposed to her a lifetime ago. She had once avoided this place, this ghost-filled landmark of her past. But tonight, standing here with Maxwell's arm wrapped around her, the cold air on her cheeks, it was just a bridge. A beautiful bridge in a beautiful city. You know, she said, looking at the soft flakes landing on his coat. He proposed to me here. Maxwell looked at her, his expression gentle. Does it bother you to be here? She shook her head, a genuine smile on her face. No, it's just a memory, and it's not the most important one I have of this place anymore. He smiled back, pulling her closer. Good, because I was hoping to make a new one. And there, on the same spot where her old life had been promised, Maxwell Lancaster got down on one knee in the falling snow and asked Aurora Monroe to be his wife. This time, there were no illusions, no empires, no grand ambitions. There was just a man and a woman grounded in truth, love, and a respect so deep it was the foundation of their world. She said yes, of course. Her answer was as quiet and sure as the falling snow, a promise of a future that wasn't about ascending, but about being truly, deeply, and unshakably home. Aurora's story isn't just about a dramatic wedding crash. It's about rewriting your own narrative. It's about realizing that the people who try to define you are often just projecting their own failures and insecurities. She didn't need a billionaire or a private jet to be powerful. She already was. The grand entrance was just her finally choosing to see herself the way the world was about to. Her real victory wasn't Declan's downfall, but her own liberation from a story that was never truly hers. What did you think of Aurora's ultimate power move? Have you ever had a moment where you had to take back your own story from someone else? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If this story of strength and vindication resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear that their past does not define them, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we have in store.